Yet, Ruminez doesn't seem to care. You are the one to be pitied. Ruminez said this, beckoning Twilight to join her. I will teach you the brutal truth, not with words but with my fists. Then even a fool, like you, will understand. That boast only irritated Twilight even more. Thanks to the experience she has cultivated over the years, even when she gets angry, her emotions remain undisturbed, and she keeps her emotions separate from her reason. This is Twilight's strength and the secret to her power. So this time, too, even though he was furious at the humiliation of being looked down upon by his own creation, he remained calm. He stretched out his hands, bent down deeply, kicked the ground, and glided forward. With a flash of speed, she reduces the distance between herself and her foe to zero, sneaks into her opponent's arms, and destroys vital points on the body with her cannonball-like pierce, pull, hand, and hand. For Ruminez, these vital points are the vessels that mimic the soul that Twilight used as the core when she created them. If this is destroyed, Ruminez will perish. As the creator, Twilight is extremely familiar with Ruminez's anatomy. She can even sense the location of her soul, which would normally be uncertain. It's truly a pity, Ruminez. I thought you would be my right-hand man and would be useful to me until the end. Twilight thought, thinking she had won. However, that was a premature leap of faith. I thought that would be the case. Ruminez's body had been pierced by Twilight, and yet she calmly grabbed Twilight's hand and said this. Ruminez tightened her grip. An unpleasant creaking sound echoed, and Twilight's arm was crushed. The part that had been sticking out from Ruminez's back fell to the ground with a thud. Behind him, Ruminez was standing there as if nothing had happened. There were no tears in her clothes, and she looked truly elegant. Twilight was stunned. There was no pain in the severed arm, and it would be easy to regenerate it. And yet, without putting that into action, he leapt away from the spot, distanced himself from Ruminez, and stood there stunned. I can't keep up with the current situation. He knows all the information about his creation, Luminous. Even after Twilight was sealed away, she continued to train, improve her skills, and gain numerous powers, and even these changes have been passed down to him. That, too, is a privilege of the creator. That's stupid. How could I be damaged? Twilight couldn't hide her shock at this event that should never have happened. On the other hand, Ruminez is completely natural. Of course, I already remember everything. You remember? Yes, the information stored in your origin blood has reminded me of all my missing memories. That's right, I am the real one, Ruminez Twilight Valentine. Ruminez said this calmly. That is the truth. What a stupid thing to say. Twilight muttered in a daze. I wanted to deny it from the bottom of my heart, but for some reason I couldn't. Right now, Luminous was silence itself. She wasn't emitting any fierce aura, but was simply quietly gazing at Twilight. He looks like a researcher. He turned a cold gaze towards Twilight, as if observing a test subject. Don't mess with me. I am the real one. No, you are certainly Twilight, but you are not perfect. The very fact that you lack essential memories is proof of that. Ruminez announced. A core or heart resides within a soul, and what forms a core or heart are memories and personality. So I thought, if I were to separate the memories and personality and create separate individuals, which one would be the real one? As I mentioned earlier, the revival of the true dragon is incomplete. Therefore, it can be said that there is no point in only reproducing their memories. When memories were reproduced, even skills, levels, and powers were also reproduced. If that's the case, what would happen if we only reproduce the personality? The answer is Luminous. Ruminez imitated the character of her divine ancestor and gained an unyielding will. He lacks skill, level, and authority, so his power is weaker. However, his presence is that of a divine ancestor, and he displays a charisma that overwhelms others. Although there were differences in their directions, Rumina's was also a successor to the divine ancestor. Even Luminous' lost memories were recreated. The result was the rebirth of the true divine ancestor, the resurrection of Luminous Twilight Valentine. If only her memories hadn't returned, Rumina's would have had no awareness of being a divine ancestor and would have existed only as an inheritor of personality. But that's just a hypothetical scenario. By unintentionally gaining his memories, the divine ancestor made a magnificent comeback, perfectly restored to the form he had before the experiment. Of course, since he had carried out the experiment of his own volition, it would be his own fault if he was not revived, but that was also a what-if scenario. Luminous continues to explain to Twilight, who refuses to accept reality. As the divine ancestor, I prepared a test subject into which I transplanted only my own personality, just like I did when creating my other senior disciples. That was me. You are the one who lost your original personality, but it seems that you also lost some of your memories. Even though she had inherited the body and memories of her divine ancestor, she was still undoubtedly a test subject, or so Rumina's said. Although it is about me, Rumina's feels like a story about someone else, because she awakened later than Jahil. She is considered the second most senior disciple of the divine ancestor, but in reality, Rumina's was the first test subject. The fact that the divine ancestor even used himself as experimental material shows that his mad intellectual curiosity was genuine. Even Rumina's, who had perfectly recreated the divine ancestor's memories, had no choice but to acknowledge this fact. In other words, the real god ancestor disappeared the moment his personality was transplanted into Rumina's. All that was left were the two test subjects. Although Twilight's body was that of a god ancestor, Rumina's argument was that it was difficult to call her a complete god ancestor. I will admit that you are the successor to the divine ancestor. However, you are not the real person. Of course, I also feel that I am the divine ancestor, but that does not mean that we are completely one and the same being. My memories are somehow like someone else's, and I'm sure that I will eventually be merged with my daughter. No, me. Just as Luminous has memory loss, Twilight does too. Through the hands of the divine ancestor, only Rumina's personality was inherited by the experimental subject. And the body that has lost its original personality is Twilight. This succession experiment had repeatedly failed, so the divine ancestor, Luminous Twilight Valentine, came up with the idea of passing on her own true name. The soul of the test subject was named Luminous, and the transfer of the personality was a great success. However, in the process, part of the divine ancestor's memories was taken away. Twilight Valentine's memories of the time before and after the experiment were erased, and only the memory of the success remained. Therefore, I can declare that you are incomplete. Rumina's concluded. There was no way she could accept this. Twilight's face turned red with disgust. You're the real deal, and I'm a fake. That's a ridiculous story. You too are not a complete fake. Stop your sophistry. Twilight became enraged, and driven by her emotions, fired a magical bullet at Luminous. At first glance, there was nothing special about it. It was just a mass of high-density energy fired with sheer force. However, it contains the secret techniques of those who call themselves divine ancestors. It moved as Twilight willed, and transformed into a chain that seemed to contain Luminous. With Rumina's captured, Twilight unleashes her trump card. The ultimate secret technique that will lead you to a place where no one can escape, no matter what. It doesn't matter who you are. I hope you continue to perish in my world. Eternal Twilight. Twilight's golden and silver demonic eyes, heterochromia, glows evilly as she speaks the name of the technique. It was like a declaration of victory, and with the ultimate eternity of anger. Manu, the return of evil king, it seemed that Rumina's fate was sealed. But however, I have also inherited the memories of the ultimate skill, Angra Manu, the king. Of evil, knowledge is power. No matter how vicious the technique, there is no way. I can't deal with it. Ruminas said this as if nothing had happened. In fact, Twilight's eternal twilight had vanished into thin air. Even Twilight was left speechless by this phenomenon. Twilight, convinced that what had just happened was some kind of mistake, once again launches Eternal Twilight. However, it's all real. It's useless, Ruminas said dismissively. At the time I regained my memories, my ultimate ability, ultimate skill, king of lust, Asmodeus, had evolved. To make it easier to demonstrate the power of God, I evolved into ultimate ability, ultimate skill, king of good light, Ahura. Mazda. What? This is an authority that is a counterpart to your ultimate skill, Angra Manu, the evil king, so it will be easy to cancel out all of your techniques. Twilight was once again left speechless. He was supposed to be an overwhelmingly stronger opponent than Ruminas, but now the situation had completely reversed. Moreover, he had been told that he was imperfect, and he no longer had the mental composure to accept it. Meanwhile, Ruminas also has no room in her mind. Just thinking about all the evil deeds you've done gives me a headache. I never imagined that my experiments had caused this situation. Every memory he recalled was the worst. There is no sense of ethics. He ignored humanity and always pursued results. He remembers conducting such experiments one after another and enjoying them. He hates to admit it, but every single one of them was carried out by Twilight. As a result of losing her righteous personality, Twilight committed all manner of evil deeds. She followed in the footsteps of her high-ranking disciples, including Jahil, who had low morals and did whatever she wanted. He also tampered with the race that the divine ancestor was trying to create, which led to the birth of evil beings like Jahil. It was a bad time to conduct the personality transfer experiment. Before her memories returned, Luminous had been cleaning up after Twilight. Without realizing it, but she wasn't able to take care of everything. The fact remains that she caused a lot of trouble in many ways. Understanding this gave Ruminas a headache. Well, it's fine. I'm also responsible for your misdeeds. I'll take care of you so you can go away in peace. Don't mess with me. I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to accept that. Twilight cried out like a spoiled child. Behind her, Ruminas appeared, closing the distance in an instant. Ruminas whispered in Twilight's ear as she delivered a knee kick. I don't need your approval. What's important is the truth. Saying this, Ruminas raised her arms towards the sky. Her beloved sword, the Night Rose, was shattered, but Ruminas still had the sword entrusted to her by Veldanava when she was still a god ancestor. The strongest sword, so powerful that it makes one hesitate to use it. That's mine. Its name was Dharma Law. The summoned Law Dharma fit perfectly in Rumina's hands. This is the first time I've seen him in that state, but he seems to be accepting of it. The proof of this is that the shape of the Law Dharma has changed to be exactly the same as the Night Rose's sword. Give it back. Give me back my sword. Twilight is terrifying precisely because she has memories. If they use that, you'll have no choice but to give up and accept that there's no chance of winning. Ruminas glanced at Twilight with pity. Now that I think about it, you two are a victim of my experiments. Your actions are unforgivable, but they are entirely my fault. At the very least, I will let you die without suffering. To be honest, Ruminas was not happy about it either. It was the divine ancestor who conducted the experiment, and Rumina's could be said to be the victim. Twilight, the empty shell of her divine ancestor, caused a number of terrible incidents. It was Luminous who rushed to clean up the mess afterwards, and she couldn't believe that she was partly responsible for them, nor did she want to. But sadly, the memory of the experiment had taken root in him, making it impossible for him to make irresponsible statements. I feel sad, angry, sorry, and all these complex emotions are vying with each other. And I find myself feeling strange. From this perspective, Twilight before him was both a divine ancestor and a god. But not a divine ancestor. If one thought that she was merely a test subject, one could feel pity for her. Therefore, Luminous decided to give Twilight the final push with the utmost mercy. Stop. Rumina's authority has evolved from ultimate ability, ultimate skill, king of lust, Asmodeus, to king of good light, Ahura Mazda. Rumina's weapon had been changed from mythical class, gods, to Genesis. Class, Genesis. Rumina's existence value is now over 20 million. The amount of law dharma will be added to that, but the current amount that Rumina's can draw out is just over 20 million. In other words, the total will exceed 40 million. And then he unleashes his strongest secret technique. Rest in peace requiem, for the dead memory end requiem. That was the conclusion. In her peace, Twilight realized her mistake. He remembered everything and realized that Rumina's words were correct. And then, it turned to dust and returned to Luminous. Incidentally, there were people watching this scene. They are the surviving members of the divine ancestors' top disciples, and in a certain small country they call themselves the three oldest wise men, or Trinity. Wise men. He had hoped to repay Rumina's kindness, but his plan quickly fell apart. Honestly, there are many things I want to say. Even though we managed to overcome the sunlight, there was no highlight. It can't be helped. There's no point in us joining the battle. We don't even need to calculate it. So they retreated in shame or something. However, that story had nothing to do with Rumina's. The king of vice is gone. At that moment, the sound of applause rang out. Rain. As expected of Lady Rumina's, that was an amazing performance. HMPH, he's still as good as ever. Rain is always frivolous. Rumina's was shocked that it was the same this time. No, I was fully willing to help, but it wasn't my turn. I don't even mean it. I was serious. I hated that damn Twilight. Rain said this with a straight face. Rumina's was shocked, but understood. I'm sorry for causing you trouble about that. I will apologize on my behalf. No, it's not Rumina-sama's fault. Even though I'm like this, I still respect you, Rumina-sama. This statement is Rain's true feelings. He hated the divine ancestor Twilight, but he loved Rumina's. So, the current Rumina-sama is the former demon Lord Rumina-sama, is that correct? Rain asked timidly. Rumina's was given the name Rumina's by Veldanava. I wondered. For Rain, this was a fact he had only learned after listening to the conversation earlier. Therefore, the reality is that people were so shocked that they could only watch. Even Twilight, whom he had always hated, was a creation of Veldanava. He had wondered why such a failure was created, and was shocked and astonished to learn that the reason was that she was an experimental subject created by Veldanava himself, separating his memories from his personality. Well, it's only natural that a bastard like that would be born sometimes, Rain thought with great understanding. But now, it appears that the memories and experiences of the divine ancestor have been integrated into the will of Rumina's, a person of great character. Rain felt it was necessary to confirm to what extent this was identical to the Rumina's he knew. That's right, I am the I, as I am the master in terms of continuing will, the I, as the divine ancestor has fallen asleep, or rather, we have already become completely integrated. That was Rumina's answer. The truth is that Rumina's has lived her life as Rumina's, and the memories of her divine ancestor have simply been imbued on top of that. Therefore, the various powers of the divine ancestor that she has inherited are also Rumina's. In other words, Rumina's was now able to freely control the ultimate abilities, ultimate skills, King of Evil Angra Mainyu and King of Good Light Ahura Mazda. In fact, she can change her appearance at will. If she is currently in the form of a woman, luminous, then when she assumes the form of a man, she can transform into twilight. Originally, the divine ancestors had no gender, but Rumina's felt something was off about this. After answering Rain's question, Rumina's changed her mind. I returned my attention to the battlefield and understood the situation. So Mizari maintained the sanctuary secret technique in my place. It must have been difficult, but you saved me. It's okay. Mizari is an excellent girl. Rain nodded in response to Rumina's praise for Mizari and boasted about it as if it were his own. This was also something that happened all the time, so Rumina's just ignored it. Rumina's has known Rain for a long time and is well aware of her true nature. As for Rain, she was optimistic and happy, thinking that it would be great if Rumina's-sama became the god ancestor from now on. Feeling elated, he quickly contacted Mizari and informed her of Rumina's return. Lady Rumina's, it seems you are now able to return to the front lines, but would it be okay if we had you switch sanctuaries? Yes, sorry for the trouble, Mizari. Rumina's flew towards Mizari while communicating through telepathy. Transmission. Rain follows suit. Once they were safely reunited, Rumina's exercised her authority. Thank you for your help. Leave the rest to me and rest for a while. No, if I could be of some help, however small, I could not be happier. God's mercy rained down on the battlefield. Rumina's had used Sanctuary Resurrection. Mizari was also relieved that the handover had gone smoothly. She then went on to support Rumina's, helping to shorten the timing of her activation. Rain will be guarding Rumina's and Mizari as their bodyguard. It may seem like he's working the least, but that's probably just my imagination. Thus, the battlefield, which had been in a critical situation, regained a sense of stability. To the east, Hinata and Kalgurio were fighting hard against the close aids of Ivarage, the humanoid cryptids, the destruction world dragons. With that in mind, Benimaru provided support. Even though it's called support, the firepower is on a completely different level. Go away, you small fry, black flame prison hell flare. In order to prevent them from interfering with the battle between superior opponents, they continued to eliminate the cryptids that were swarming in an attempt to destroy the holy purification barrier. Benimaru was standing at the base point to the east, where Cardinal Nicholas had deployed his forces. As he was right in the middle of the enemy's target, there was no shortage of prey. Even at a time like this, Benimaru's expression was bright. Ever since he learned of Rimuru's return, he was convinced that he could no longer be defeated. He cuts down the approaching phantom beast, cryptid with one slash, and throws it away. To Benimaru, even if it was a high-ranking individual, it was no match for him. Even the weakest individual is comparable to a demon lord, but for Benimaru at the moment, they are an easy opponent to control. They are not skilled in martial arts, nor are they highly intelligent. The perception was that anything other than individuals that had evolved into a human form was not a threat. However, for the members of the Holy Knights, Crusaders, and the new Imperial Guards, this is a story that would make them want to complain, saying, "There's no way that's true." But it's okay. Benimaru doesn't plan his strategies based on his own strength, so in that respect, He can rest easy. Among them, the ones who stood out on the battlefield were the 200 members of Testeros's Black Corps, Black Numbers. With the Empress returning and glaring at them, it was only natural that they would be fired up. There was no thought of slacking off from the beginning, but the atmosphere was such that even a single mistake was not tolerated. In fact, it even seemed as if they were more afraid of the rear than the enemy. Well, thanks to their hard work, the battlefield is starting to become more relaxed. So Benimaru has no complaints. Good luck, you guys. And so he gave a lukewarm cheer. Ame. In the south, the battle between Ultima and Swim was reaching its climax. Ultima laughs. Swim was certainly strong, but to be honest, he was less of a threat than the powerful opponents he had faced in the past. The power is certainly strong. The power of the technique is tremendous, and a direct hit would undoubtedly result in instant death. However, there is no point if your skill and level are child's play. If Swim had continued fighting in his normal way, he probably wouldn't have even found a way to defeat him. However, once he took on a human form, the situation changed completely. Use you. Swim loses his temper and screams. The ray that was meant to completely reduce Ultima to dust was easily dodged. That was frustrating. Swim's fragile ego cannot tolerate being in a disadvantageous position. He only has memories of always unilaterally crushing the weak and has no experience of overcoming adversity. From Ultima's perspective, he was an easy target. If he let his guard down, he would be destroyed in an instant, but Ultima was not the type to make such a mistake. He focused on defense while observing Swim's movements and figuring out his habits. The beam of light emitted from Swim's palm itself was at near light speed, but the movement of turning his palm wasn't that fast, so it was obvious. If he had carefully observed the overall movement, it would have been easy to deal with. Swim's punch is strong. The impact would be greater than that of a meteorite, the size of a small rock. However, since it was an amateurish phone call, there was no way it would reach Ultima. If Swim were to learn proper martial arts, he would grow up to be an unstoppable monster. However, that future never came, and Ultima was not kind enough to let him learn during combat. You're weak. It is superior in terms of existence value. Although Swim contained more than 10 times the amount of energy, making it an opponent that was numerically impossible to defeat, he was now nothing more than prey to Ultima. Although she was nowhere near the speed of light in terms of physical speed, by using magic, she could deal with it even in a world that was closer to the speed of light. That was Ultima's combat sense. He inherited the techniques from Damrata and made them his own through friendly competition with Zijin. By further hunting them, he had acquired the skills to live up to the title of Fist Demon. Furthermore, he has experienced combat with a being far superior to him. Velgrind. Swim was inferior to Velgrind, so from Ultima's perspective, she seemed like an unremarkable opponent. Ultima materialized 2 knives and used them to fight against Swim, who was covered in hard armor. The handles of the knives were knuckle-shaped and could also be used for striking. This is what is called a knuckle guard knife. Ultima maintains a fighting style where she holds the knife in an underhand grip in her right hand and in a normal grip in her left, using her left hand as the main defensive hand. With both fists protected, she can not only stab with a knife but also punch away. Furthermore, like Diablo's scissors, this knife is a mythical god weapon, materialized by Ultima. As such, it can be taken out and put back in freely, and when using the hand chop to perform red snake poison hand, bloody bite, it can also be freely transformed into cursed poison to protect the entire palm. Well, I'm getting bored of fighting you, so it's time to end it. After saying that, Ultima's smile deepened. Although it looked innocent at first glance, it was a smile of sheer evil. It was a smile of confidence in victory. And that will happen shortly. The Black Death collapse, limit end, will occur soon. Cursed poison that Ultima had been shooting at Swim in small bursts with. Red snake poison hand, bloody bite was slowly seeping into Swim's body. It was a demonic curse that triggered a dramatic chemical reaction in response to a specific signal, and it was causing black spots to appear on Swim's body surface. And armor. That is the very definition of Black Death collapse limit end. Once the cursed poison has penetrated the body, it generates a black flame. Core and settles in the optimal form to cause a chain reaction. Furthermore, it behaves like a cancer cell, absorbing energy from the host it has settled in and growing rapidly. Swim's energy was immense, and his growth was rapid. A devil's fruit filled with energy ripens inside Swim's body. These all detonate at once, so no living thing can resist them. The best way to deal with this type of technique is to deal with it before it gets to this point. Swim's ignorance of this was the reason for his defeat. Is it really that easy to set up an ignorant opponent? Ultima wondered. It was so easy that it wasn't even fun. Black spots appear all over Swim's body, changing color and pattern. Black vines ran across the spots, connecting them, and a purple flower bloomed. In the center of Swim's body surface, where the heart would be in a human body. This is the signal that the poison has spread. Ultima didn't miss this, and put the finishing touches on it appropriately. Core break. Huh. The next moment, the black flame core abyss core was activated and the enormous amount of energy it had stored inside Swim's body imploded. All of that energy was concentrated in Swim's center, and there, a door to the void, created by Ultima, opened. Plus and minus equals 0. Without even understanding what had happened, Swim was swallowed up by nothingness on the spot. Emme. To the west, Kashi was unrivaled against main forces. Shin was struggling against the Kashi, and Gabuta and Ranga were doing their best beside her, when Kumara, tired of fighting small fry, joined the fight. Kashi felt annoyed. Kashi was always feared as one of the kings who reigned over the other world. His power is undefeated, and he has never even experienced a battle that could be called a fight. In front of Kashi, all living things were nothing but prey. There were exceptions, but these people each protected their own territory, so there was no fighting. However, Kakashi's instincts called for hunting. Kakashi's desire was a thirst for a blood-pumping, thrilling battle. This was the difference from Swim. Kashi, instinctively, knew how to continue to improve himself. It was precisely because of this situation that I was disappointed with the battle. There was no excitement as expected. That's because Gabuta, who had transformed into a demon wolf with Ranga, Kumara, who had summoned the 8 guardians and returned them to their tails at full power, and even Shin, were all too weak to even inflict a scratch on Kashi. I even tried to take a direct hit on purpose, but it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. I sometimes acted like I was in pain to lull my opponent into a false sense of security, but I'm starting to think that maybe that wasn't even necessary. However, we must not let our guard down. This is because Kashi is now human-shaped, not 4-legged. Not only was he still not used to controlling his strength, but his fighting style had completely changed. Although he was responding with exceptional combat sense, he still had not reached the level of expertise. Kashi understood this and learned a lot from watching Gabuta and Ranga and Shin's fighting styles and teamwork. It's so hard it's scary. My attacks won't work either. Don't give up. There's definitely a way to beat it. I'll definitely find it. With Gabuta, Ranga, and Shin on the front lines and Kumara on the attacking side, they formed an impromptu but brilliant teamwork to challenge Kashi. However, from Kakashi's perspective, it just seemed like the same thing over and over again. Kakashi's keen sense of smell allows him to perfectly grasp the movement of magical energy. Using information from smells, it is possible to completely recreate the battlefield. In the mind, it was more accurate than magic perception, and there was less delay in receiving information. It was able to grasp information from all directions without needing sight or hearing. From that vantage point, the enemy's movements were completely visible. The pattern was different, but it wasn't interesting. So he got bored and tried to finish it off quickly. However, from here on, things don't go as planned. I thought he would be an easy opponent to defeat, but he turned out to be surprisingly tenacious. Gabuta and Ranga placed more importance on defense than offense. They moved around to avoid getting hit and would attack when they found an opening. In the cliffhanger, Kumara was a scout, but her attacks were light enough to be ignored. However, this turned out to be a disadvantage, as she was able to inflict abnormal conditions such as poison and paralysis, hindering Kakashi's movements. Shin was equally troublesome. It may seem like a rough attack, but it was actually a very clever combination. He uses his own attacks as a distraction, creating an opening for Gabuta and Ranga to launch a strike, or he waits for the moment they're weakened by Kumara's attack to unleash a powerful blow. He was truly used to fighting. As soon as Kakashi tries to divert his attention to someone else, he will launch a powerful attack. And Shin's attacks were the only ones that Kakashi felt were painful. They were just painful and not that threatening, but he was beginning to find them annoying. That's why Kakashi wanted to finish it quickly, but Shin never pursued anything too deeply. Perhaps it could be called natural instinct, but his ability to sense danger was outstanding. His instructions to Gabuta and Ranga, as well as Kumara, were accurate and even. Kakashi, who was supposed to be an absolute powerhouse, was not able to inflict a fatal wound on him. However, if they continued fighting like this, it would only be a matter of time before they were defeated. However, at this point, the situation began to change. I'm here. At this moment, Veldora finally joined the battle. When Veldora reunited with them, he headed to where Shin and the others were, fighting a fierce battle against Kakashi, who had taken on a human form. They haven't given up yet. In fact, Shin seems to be full of motivation. However, it didn't matter to Veldora. It's good to watch over them from the position of a master, but if you look at it from a different perspective, it could also look like you're slacking of. Now that Rimuru had returned, Veldora wanted to do everything he could to reduce any chances of him getting angry. Yes, first I need to achieve something great, then I'll be praised again. A banquet should be held to celebrate my achievements. Veldora felt excited. And so I stood in front of Kakashi, shouting, I'm here. However, there were some people who were furious about this. I